We are seeing a global battle between populists and elitists. The lips of the elitist media, populism is Hitlerism. It's fascism. And that's just stupid, and it's false. There's been a corresponding decline with Kamala Harris and her candidacy, and you sense panic on the other side. So now they're trying this Hail Mary. This is an attempt to destroy Trump by inference. Nothing else to date has worked. So they go back to the old playbook and they pull out an old strategy, one that they've employed before, and that is Trump is Hitler. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton, and this is your election special. Tomorrow is election day, and I really want to cover today where the campaigns are from the standpoint of strategy. And really this means focusing on what the Harris campaign is doing. Right now, the Trump campaign is surging. He's surging in the polls, and they're attempting a Hail Mary here at the very end. Now, we already know that there will be shenanigans at the ballot box. We know that Democrats do their voting between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I mean, this has been the pattern since 2016, and really it ramped up in 2020, and I think we can see it in a very big way, or should expect to see it in a very big way tomorrow. But let's talk about this claim that Trump is Hitler. I want to get behind what's really going on here. I mean, do they really believe that Donald Trump is a would-be Adolf Hitler, that he's a great admirer of Adolf Hitler? Or is there something else going on here? Well, of course, I believe that there is definitely something else going on here. But let's track kind of the history of these claims. Now, I want to start with the cover of the New Republic. And here we see American fascism, and it is the face of Donald Trump altered to look like Adolf Hitler. I mean, really. I mean, this is really kind of an evil thing to do when you think about it. I mean, they're comparing a former president of the United States, a man that they formerly liked quite a lot. I mean, you've all seen Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live. You know that the Clintons attended his wedding. You know that he was a contributor to the Clinton campaign. You know that he's a Democrat. You know that they had him in Home Alone, all of those things. But then suddenly they turned against him. And boy, when they turned against him, I mean, they really turned against him. Now, a question arises, why did they turn against him to the degree that they have? And I want to address that before I get to the Hitler claims. Trump is Hitler claims. Well, I believe and have said many times before that I think the primary reason they turned against him with such vitriol is because Trump they see as one of them. This is the way Dave Chappelle has put it in one of his sketches, that he really is one of them, that he's a guy who, is sitting in this house, and his description, his comedic sketch that really exposes a lot of truth in this. Chappelle says, here's Trump. He's a guy in the house who's playing the game with all of these other politicians, but he's an honest thief or something like that he calls him. He's the one who comes out and says to the rest of us, let me tell you what they're doing in there. They're cheating. They're doing all kinds of things against you in there. They are conspiring against you. And then he goes back in and continues to play the game. If you haven't seen that little sketch of Dave Chappelle, you can find it. It's all over social media. Just type in Dave Chappelle and Trump and you'll find it. But it's really quite insightful and I think quite accurate. They hate Trump chiefly because, not just because he is, a Republican candidate for president, but because they view him as a blue state traitor. I mean, here he is, a New York, New Jersey guy, and from a deep blue states. And he runs not merely as a Republican, but he runs as a pro-evangelical, at least in 2016, less so this time, but big time in 2016. And as a man of the people, he has started a populist movement. And I've said to you many times on this show, one of the things that I hope I do, and I try to bring to you, you have to think about when you're a writer, when you're a freelance columnist, when you're a cultural commentator, as I am, and that leads you, of course, into politics, is you have to have a strategy about how you prepare yourself. And one of the things that I found years ago, I used to be a news junkie. I subscribed to multiple news magazines, both on the left and the right, U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek. I subscribed to National Review. I was trying to read them all. And then, of course, I was listening. I was listening to, everything from Rush Limbaugh to NPR. I was deeply immersed. And what I discovered was that it wasn't helpful. And it wasn't helpful because I found that whether I intended to or not, you kind of pirated other people's ideas and you regurgitated them, and you weren't really bringing anything original to the way you were processing that information or the things that were taking place in the culture, be it just social, political, or otherwise. You just weren't. And it's kind of like I began applying a methodology that, at least in a good seminary, that they would teach you about preparing a sermon. And it looks something like this, that you first come to the text, you come to the biblical text without prejudice, meaning you haven't read any commentaries at this point. You just approach the text and you allow the text to speak to you. You read it, you ponder it, you think about it, you read it again, and you think about it a little bit more, when you're mowing the grass or when you're driving the car or in those few moments before you fall asleep, and then you read it again. And then if there are things that you're not quite, figuring out or understand, you approach a commentary, a reputable commentary that offers you some insight. But at least before you've gotten to the commentary, you have been able to formulate your own ideas afresh. And I think that's important. And that's why for me, as the Posse would know, I'm not a listener to other political podcasts. I don't listen to any of them. And it isn't because I'm arrogant and think nobody has anything to offer me. Quite the opposite. I'm sure that there are many who have quite a few things to say that I would find useful, but I want my thoughts to be my own thoughts. I don't want them to be thoughts that I pirated from Joe Rogan or I got from Megyn Kelly or I took from someone else's podcast. So the result is I tend to listen to literature and to sports radio because everybody, and I would say this for you, especially in this election week, you need to have a kind of mental oasis. I mean, you need them physically too, whether it's a place that you like to go, a park, or, maybe some part on your own property where you can sit on the porch or you can watch a sunset or a sunrise, or maybe it's a restaurant or whatever it is. You need them physically, but you also need them mentally. Places that you can go to escape the stress, the anxiety-inducing news cycle. And it's designed to induce anxiety. It's designed to keep you in a constant state of near hysteria. And for me, it's often listening to literature. I don't listen to a lot of nonfiction. I listen mostly to classical literature or to very reputable books, with the occasional thriller or something, a mystery thrown into the mix. And I also listen to a lot of sports radio, at least during football season. And it is football. So you need those where you can go and you can find that. But for me, part of my prep is that I try to approach the things that are happening in the news afresh. And also I try to get out into the world and not just, get up in my pajamas and my slippers and, listen to what somebody else had to say or watch, Fox News or CNN or what have you, and then sit down and write an article or begin to pontificate. I want to know, as much as I'm able to, I want to know firsthand what is happening in the culture. And one of the things that I can tell you that is happening in the culture, circling back to what I was saying about why they hate Donald Trump, one of the things I've discovered in recent years, I'd say since 2016, but it has accelerated hugely since 2020 and COVID. And that is that we are seeing a global battle, not just in the United States, not just in Canada. We are seeing a global battle between populists, that is to say the common people, and elitists. Now, on the lips of the elitist media, populism is Hitlerism. It's fascism. And that's just stupid. And it's false. Populism is neither good nor bad. It's just a movement of the people. And that movement can be an evil movement, or it can be a positive movement. One could say that fascism, Nazism, was a populist movement in Germany, meaning it started with the common people. It wasn't imposed from the top down first, but it began at a fairly grassroots level. We would say certainly that was evil, but we would also say that the American Revolution was a populist movement and therefore popular. Braveheart, that film, you've seen it, although, William Wallace wasn't actually in history Braveheart. That was Robert the Bruce, who they make to look like a pansy in that movie. By the way, Robert the Bruce in real history was a badass. He's not the guy who's pulling out the hanky, at the end of the movie, trying to decide whether or not he's really going to stand up and fight for Scotland or he's going to betray them yet again. He was not that at all. But anyway, that's Scottish rebellion. That was a populist movement. So when we're talking about populism, we are talking about the common people. And what we're seeing around the world is the common people are standing up, particularly in the Western world, but not exclusively in the Western world. That is to say, we are seeing it in parts of South America. We're seeing it in Asia. We're seeing it in Europe, certainly North America, Central America, even bits of Africa, but where the people are standing up and saying enough is enough and pushing back against elitists, not elites. Do not call them elites. That's a compliment to them. They are elitists, meaning they're people who think they're better than you. And they do think that. That is part of the mindset of these kind of people. And I say that because I've spent a lot of time hanging out with them, just to try to get into their heads and try to understand who they are and what they're about. Regular listeners to Ideas Have Consequences to this show will know that I've spent the last 2 years, I've gone to the World Economic Forum, and I'll do it again this year. Now, maybe this year they'll be wise to me and won't let me get in, but doesn't matter. Those people all stay in hotels, and I'll be there. I will interact with them, and I will, again, listen to them because they won't know who I am, and they will speak to me like I'm a fellow WEFer. And you begin to hear the warped ideology. Now, the left hates Donald Trump with a white-hot hatred, more than they hate, say, Ted Cruz, more than they hate, they ever hated George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan, more than they hate any other conservative. They hate, Republican, because all these people aren't conservatives who I'm naming here. They hate him above all because they see him as an insider, one of them, who betrayed them and his blue state roots and didn't run as a left of center Republican, but in 2016, he ran as a conservative. Now, Donald Trump, as I've said to you before, isn't naturally conservative. He's a Democrat of the 1970s and 1980s. He's never really changed as it relates to that. It's just that, as Elon Musk has said several times, the party has moved further and further and further to the left, while he has kind of remained where he was before. So it isn't so much that he changed his ideas. It's rather that, people like the Clintons and others, the Obamas and so on, began radicalizing the Democrat Party. And he said, not going with you. I actually don't hate my country. I like my country. I don't like open borders. I'm not in favor of that. No, I'm not in favor of Marxism. I'm not in favor of toppling statues. So this is who Donald Trump is. And he's like, I'm not going with them. And because of that, and because of the fact that he championed a populist, pro-American, patriotic movement in the United States. You know, Lawrence Fox, I do another show. It's a show with him. It's a little different in character from this one. This one is highly prepped. And I'm doing, kind of teaching here. That one, it's just a conversation, WTF. It's a conversation between myself and Lawrence Fox, a former British actor, now activist and political activist, political candidate on occasion. And he made this observation that I think he's dead on with, that America First, it isn't as much a political movement as it is a social movement. And I think he's right about that. I think that what we're seeing is really less political. I mean, it has political ramifications, political expression, and tomorrow, and the presidential election is, really kind of the pinnacle of its political expression. But what we're really seeing is a sociological phenomenon. We are seeing a cultural divide between one kind of American and another kind of American. That's what's happening. You're seeing people who are elitist, who are kind of ashamed to be Americans. They've always kind of wanted to be Europeans and clink their champagne glasses on the Champs-Élysées in Paris and be thought of as sophisticates. And then you have other people who say, you know what? I love America. I love my country. I love God. I read the Bible. I go to church. And guess what? I don't think I'm racist if I want my country to actually have borders. So that's what we're seeing. As we go through life, the years bring us wisdom, experience, and memories we hold dear. Yet with age, our health often faces new challenges. It's a natural part of life, but it's crucial to address these changes with the right care and attention. For me, one of the ways to stay sharp is to supplement. I've been using Liver Health Formula, and I recommend you try it for yourself to see the results that it can bring. And right now, I think is the time to start taking care of your liver, because there is a silent epidemic affecting 100 million Americans. 1 in 3 Americans suffer from an overworked and sluggish liver. It affects our weight, energy levels, clear thinking and productivity, and even sleep. Our livers get bombed every day with GMOs, microplastics, toxins, and all of the stuff that you might not even know about. Liver Health Formula can support your liver to minimize the impacts of all of this. It is a premium supplement designed with 11 clinically proven botanicals to support and detoxify your liver, helping you feel revitalized and ready to conquer each day. Just listen to Mr. Harrington's testimonial, who shared his transformative journey. At first, I was skeptical, but the health improvement has been nothing but amazing. The tired, foggy feeling I've had is gone. I have more energy for a longer duration. Also, the service and delivery is always prompt. Of course, results are not typical, thus you have to see for yourself. There's an exclusive deal for my audience. Head to getliverhelp.com/Larry. And as a special offer, you'll get a free 1-month supply of nano-powered omega-3s with your order. That's getliverhelp.com/Larry. So what has happened over the course of this election cycle has been really quite extraordinary, or during this campaign. Trump has gained steam. He's gained momentum, tremendous momentum. He's been a juggernaut. And when you consider all the things that they've, and this, by the way, regardless of whether you like Trump or not, if you're honest, you have to admit that what I'm telling you is true. Trump has been unstoppable up to this point. Here is a guy that they've used lawfare to try to imprison. They've created an atmosphere of assassination, multiple assassination attempts that he somehow survived. And rather than slinking away and hiding in a basement, as Biden did in 2020, guess what? He just seemed to pick up energy. And for the age of the man, he seems to have limitless reservoirs of energy. He just keeps going. And he's got a sense of humor. One of the things that really impressed me with the McDonald's stunt, which was clever. It was very clever that the Trump campaign did, was if you watched him, and there were loads of videos of him. It's not just one. There were dozens, maybe several dozen videos of Trump that day at McDonald's. And he clearly is enjoying himself. Trump's probably his greatest strength is that he generally likes people. Now, there are some people, like the rest of us, that he doesn't like at all. And I can't fault him for that. The ones he doesn't like, I tend to not like too. But the man seems to like people. He's not an elitist. Billionaire though he is, he's not an elitist, and I attribute that largely to the fact that he grew up in the construction business, meaning he wasn't just hanging at his country club. He wasn't just hanging around other billionaires, but Trump knows how to move among the people, among ordinary people. And this is kind of what I was saying earlier, in that in my own life and in my own work, I feel that it's very important that I engage all sorts of people so that I have not just the ability maybe to speak to them and understand them, because you can lose the ability to understand people when you're just hanging with your own set, but also so that I know what really is happening in the culture. And this is what Trump does. He's out there looking like he knows, how to actually make some fries, and that he's taking it seriously, and he's enjoying talking to people, just ordinary people. One of the people wonder, how is it the guy is able to keep up and do all of these rallies and all of these events? I think part of the secret is that he likes doing it. Let me repeat that. I think he likes doing it. When you're looking at Kamala Harris, she looks like she hates everything that she's doing. There's a shot of her, it appears to be a long shot, focusing in on an airplane window that I'm not certain that it's an airplane window. Doesn't matter. But it shows her sitting in a seat. The camera angle is from over here, looking through the window, and she looks exhausted and she looks unhappy. And an aide is talking to her, and she appears to not be really paying attention at all. That's not Trump. And by that, I don't mean that he doesn't get exhausted or frustrated too. I'm sure that he does quite a lot. But I think these events, they invigorate him. He's energized by his engagement with people. He likes what he's doing. And I think that's a really, really important quality for Trump. So the result has been that over the course of this campaign, even after the attempted assassination of him, and yet another one, and the media burying that event and the one that followed, Trump just seems to be picking up steam. And the polls reflect this. As he has risen, there's been a corresponding decline with Kamala Harris and her candidacy, and you sense panic on the other side. So now they're trying this Hail Mary. This is an attempt to destroy Trump by inference. Nothing else to date has worked. So they go back to the old playbook and they pull out an old strategy, one that they've employed before, and that is Trump is Hitler. So we see it here on the New Republic. Now, the New Republic, just so you know, if CNN is over here on the left, the New Republic is somewhere, about 50 feet in that direction. The New Republic is extremely left-wing. But still, the New Republic has always kind of fashioned itself as intellectual, thoughtful, deeper, and honest. This is deeply dishonest. Trump is Hitler, the image of Trump with the little mustache on the cover. But they're not the only ones to do it. The Washington Post ran this opinion piece. Yes, it's okay to compare Trump to Hitler. Don't let us stop you. I memean, come on. Trump is Hitler. Yeah, don't let us stop you. Go ahead. Keep doing it. So there was an an orchestrated campaign here, you will notice that frequently among members of the media, these things they're not just happening, where the Washington Post is talking about this and CNN is talking about something completely different, and the New Republic and so forth are talking about yet other things. These campaigns are orchestrated, and we know this. We know that the media, legacy media, is a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. No rational person would deny that. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, we know that this is the way they work. Doesn't mean that there aren't occasionally very honest pieces or accurate ones that they publish. But since 2016, they've moved in this direction heavily. And I know this from personal experience because I used to publish with a number of these kinds of places. And I wanted to because I want to be heard by the left. Those are the people I want to engage. I would love to be the token conservative on CNN or on Bill Maher or someplace like that. I mean, if it's fair, because those are the people I want to go after. Those are the minds that I want to change. And I could do it up until 2016 and a little bit here and there after 2016. But by the time we get to 2020, it's pretty well over. And it's because those institutions, those news agencies had purged almost all of their, what shall I say, truly liberal editors and producers. And by truly liberal, I mean this. People who believed in free speech and they believed in a marketplace of ideas. They believed that the conservative perspective should be heard as well as the left-wing perspective. And while they understood, let's say at CNN, for example, that, they were serving, by and large, an audience on the left, they nonetheless believed, let's get a conservative in here to offer their perspective. And I would often be that guy. And I enjoyed being able to do that. But after 2016, those opportunities started being closed off, and they began looking for David French-like conservatives. Not real ones, but people who postured as conservatives, who pretended to be conservatives. And they did that because that's part of the propaganda strategy. We're going to take somebody that we try to convince you is one of you, who represents you, and we're going to use him to convince you that you're wrong about a particular issue and why you should join us. That's the way it usually works. They don't really want. I remember the last time I published with the Atlantic, it was a Sunday morning, and I got a call from the editor. And she said, and she was somebody I liked, by the way. She was on the left, but she was very fair, very thoughtful. And she said she was getting some pressure from, I don't know if they're part of it. The Atlantic has a board or exactly what the case was, but she was getting calls about this article my article was being circulated before it was published in the Atlantic. And they wanted it removed. They did not want the piece published. And she said, I wonder if you'd be willing to change some of the verbiage. And there may have been a thing or two that I said, okay, well, that's not a big deal. But there were other things that I said, nope, not changing that. And that's because the article goes out with my name on it. And I have to defend it. And that is not what I think. That's not representative of what I believe. They were kind of shamed into publishing it. They did publish it, and much to their chagrin, it went viral. It went viral, and probably because conservatives weren't used to seeing a conservative perspective in the Atlantic. It just, as a rule, didn't happen. So when something like that was as strongly conservative and evangelical as that particular piece was, and it was a piece that was criticizing the LGBTQ movement. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that our content doesn't get nearly the amount of attention on YouTube that it used to get. And that's because we talk about a lot of stuff here that big tech companies don't really like us talking about. So they suppress us. We want to make sure that we have the ability to bring you the very best content without big tech censorship. The best way to see everything that I'm doing all in one place is to go to ideashaveconsequences.com. That's ideashaveconsequences.com. This is where you'll find all of my podcast episodes as well as exclusive content and never before seen footage. It's also where you can join my community, the Posse, read my blogs and articles, access my courses, and join live events. That's ideashaveconsequences.com. Ideashaveconsequences.com. We want to build the Posse, so please join it. Back to the podcast. This was a piece that I had written about Duck Dynasty's Phil Robertson. I was defending Phil Robertson. If you will remember that there was an attempt to get him fired. A&E wanted to fire him for a few remarks that he made. But after that, after 2016, it became really hard to get published in any of those places anymore. Didn't matter how many people had read your pieces or how popular they were, or how well you could write. They weren't interested anymore, and that's because it's all changed. And the effort to try to portray a guy like Trump, like for instance, in past, if I had wanted to reply to the Washington Post, say, I'd like to write a piece that takes on, that's a counter perspective on your Trump is Hitler assertion. In past, they might be willing to publish that because they wanted to appear to be in the middle of the road and to being open to hearing all perspectives. Not anymore. So you have to understand where we are. So the Trump is Hitler narrative started and it began being pushed and it was picking up a little bit of steam. And then you have this piece from the Atlantic, the aforementioned Atlantic, by Annie Applebaum, and it says, Trump is speaking like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. How? But again, now you see it's the Trump is Hitler narrative is being picked up. It's going elsewhere. Then you have USA Today with this headline. This one really cracks me up, but it's why you need to be really wary of fact-checking. Fact-checking is almost always lying. It's it's propaganda. Usually fact-checkers aren't out and outlying. They're being deceptive. And let me show you how with this headline. USA Today. I've written a lot for USA Today, but they purged their editor, who I liked as well. No, the Atlantic didn't publish a story with a headline saying Trump is Hitler. Fact check. That's true. They didn't publish an article with the headline saying Trump is Hitler. But you just heard what the headline was. Trump is speaking like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. Do you see how deceptive that is? They're making it sound like, and they know that the majority of people don't read articles, they just read headlines. And they know that most people are not going to go and look for the Atlantic story, so they just accept, okay, well, I guess the Trump campaign is lying, that conservatives are lying, that people on social media who are criticizing the Atlantic are lying, that the Atlantic didn't do this. But the fact check uses deceptive language. It's kind of like saying, your mom asking you when you got home early the next morning after a party, did you sleep with that girl you went out with last night? And you say no. And then later she finds out that you did. And you say, I didn't lie. I said I didn't sleep with her. And we didn't sleep. Okay, we had sex, but we didn't. You see what I mean? This is what they're doing. The Atlantic didn't publish a story with the headline saying Trump is Hitler. No, they just said that he sounds like Hitler. And they implied that he is Hitler. You see how they lie. You see how this works. But anyway, it continues. Then we have John Kelly saying, this is a PBS story, PBS headline here from PBS NewsHour, what John Kelly said about Trump's praise of Hitler and fascist tendencies. Now let's watch the video here of this particular interview with John Kelly.
Moments ago, the New York Times posted clips from 3 new interviews with General Kelly. In it, he does not specifically refer to Jeffrey Goldberg's new reporting, which was in The Atlantic, but he confirms previous report that the former president had made admiring statements about Adolf Hitler. Kelly also told the Times that in his opinion, Trump met the definition of a fascist and would govern like a dictator if allowed.
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America.
Who is John Kelly? It would have been worth a lot for PBS to offer a little corrective here, but of course they don't. So they're propping up John Kelly as authoritative on fascism, on Trump, and on the way Trump thinks and what Trump wants. And it's worth asking, well, exactly who is John Kelly? Well, he was Trump's chief of staff, and Trump fired him. It's like going and asking your ex for a review of you and your life. Probably not going to get a very favorable one. Doesn't mean that the opinion that John Kelly or your ex shared is false, but it means that you should approach it very skeptically, because you know that it's highly likely that this is a disgruntled individual who has an agenda. Think about that. If your life, and this is where the left wants to take us, by the way, with such things, starting with Wikipedia and social credit system and so forth, is they want your life to have a social credit rating, and they want it to be where people can go on there and rate you. There's something called My Professor, rate my professor, rate your professor. I forget how it goes, but it's a website, Rate Your Professor, ratemyprofessor.com. And where if you're a professor, you're a teacher, your students can go on there and write whatever they want about you anonymously. And you have a star rating, let's say between 1 and 5 stars, and those get hit, kind of like an Amazon review. They want that for your life. That's what they want. And so imagine that the review of your life is made up of all the people you fired, or the girlfriend that you broke up from, or the boy that you married and divorced. I mean, those are not going to be particularly favorable reviews. But that's who they went to here as an authority. And of course, others who knew Kelly have strongly condemned what Kelly said, that he's lying, that he's claiming that Trump said this when he didn't say it. That at least is the claim of others. But here we are with John Kelly asserting that Donald Trump, he wants to be a dictator, that he's a fascist, that he praised Hitler. So again, we saw how this began. It begins with a few headlines here or there. Others begin to pick it up, and then you find somebody that appears to be an authority on the issue, and someone that is going to take your view in the matter. Notice they didn't go and ask Victor Davis Hanson if they thought that Trump was, say, a fascist. They didn't do that. So John Kelly's the guy that they prop up. They give him plenty of oxygen to say what he says, and they go, oh gosh, look at what he said. Trump's Hitler. He loves Hitler. This is like Nikki Haley, by the way. Have you noticed that Nikki Haley is all of a sudden, it seems like everywhere, and she's criticizing Trump? Now, why would legacy media want to platform Nikki Haley? It isn't because she has anything nice to say about Trump. And she is the embittered ex, by the way. She has been jilted by the Trump campaign. She was complaining that they haven't talked to her since several months ago. She feels like they should be talking to her. This is a woman, by the way, who I think she's a complainer. She's out there attacking Trump, and I think she's angling for a cabinet post. That's what she wants. You want me to shut up, Trump? You want me to stop going out and giving these interviews, claiming you're a horrible human being and that people shouldn't vote for you? Then give me a seat at the table. That's what she's doing. There's a kind of extortion, I believe, that's going on with Nikki Haley's criticism. But again, the left is eager. They are very eager to prop you up, to give you oxygen, to give you a seat at the table when you're going to say the things that they want you to say. You're going to take the position that they want you to take. So this is what John Kelly did. Now, let me explain how media works in this respect. Think of a Wikipedia smear. Wikipedia, I would think that members of the Posse would know that Wikipedia is not an authoritative source of information. Having taught for many years, I will tell you, if I received a paper where you were citing Wikipedia, that's not a reliable source of information. It doesn't mean you can't cite it to get a birth date or to see, exactly, what time of day that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. You might look at it. Sometimes I have looked at it to see sources, to find particular sources. But as a rule, I don't want to give Wikipedia a click. I would suggest that you don't give it a click, but certainly don't view it as an authoritative source of information on anything. It is controlled by leftists. And indeed, I would say that by and large, the internet is controlled by leftist atheists. But I guess I repeat myself, when I say that. So how a Wikipedia smear works is, first, you have to have Wikipedia trying to give the appearance that they are that they have integrity about their smears. What they do is they say that you have to cite a source. So if I want to smear you, what I first do is I have someone write an article about you. Then I go into Wikipedia and I write what I want to say about you and I cite that source. See, now it will stay on Wikipedia because it's deemed to be a cited source, and therefore it's deemed to be accurate. It's deemed to be truthful because, it's in print. The Washington Post said it. The Atlantic said it. USA Today said it. Therefore, it must be true. So if you want it to stick, you need a source. And you first establish the source. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. You want to smear somebody. And in the operations of smears, truthfulness is not primarily your goal. So you establish a source to give your smear the veneer of authority. And then what they do is they trot out, in this case, a historian. The New York Times runs this headline: "Is it fascism? A leading historian changes his mind." So they get Robert Paxton to come out, a Harvard historian, to say that he thinks that Donald Trump is truly a fascist. Now, with all due respect to Robert Paxton, this is a stupid claim. And I will explain why it is a stupid claim as we go on. One of the most obvious things is that Trump has been president of the United States before, Robert. This isn't his first time around. But anyway, they trot him out, and again, they can now cite him on something like Wikipedia or in other news sources. Notice they haven't brought anyone else out to say this is silly. Notice, again, that the New York Times did do an interview with Victor Davis Hanson on this topic. That isn't what they want. That doesn't fit the agenda. The worst kind of research, ladies and gentlemen, stick with me in this for a second. The worst kind of research is to begin with your conclusion and work backward from it, discarding all evidence that contradicts your conclusion. In real scholarship, what you do is you begin with a tentative thesis. Let's say that Washington was a great man. Then you do your research to see whether or not the evidence substantiates the claim. Does the evidence substantiate your thesis? And then you write your conclusion based on the evidence. That's what you do. But that's not the way media works. They begin with a priori assumptions, Trump is Hitler, and then they work backward from it, and they discard any evidence that doesn't fit the narrative. I've said many times on this show, I can use facts to tell a very non-factual story about anyone's life. Let me repeat that. I can use facts to tell a non-factual story to smear anybody. I would know how to do it. I know how this works. And the way you do it is you arrange the facts in such a way and omit facts. There are certain ones you don't include to tell the story you want to tell. And you give it, you give the facts in the blackest light possible. You give it a sinister glow. And you leave certain things hanging to place doubts in the minds of the reader. So you say something like this, and by the way, this is a tactic I hate. Both sides do this. They'll show a picture of, I saw one recently of T.D. Jakes with, what's his name, P. Diddy. I hate guilt by association inferences. I didn't know a thing about P. Diddy. And if I had ever seen him and let's just say there was an opportunity for a pic, I'd have probably stood next to him and put my hand on his shoulder and we get a pic together. I don't know everything about all the people that I've had photographs with. Some of them might be murderers or rapists or, into child porn. I can't know that. Guilt by association is a weak argument. Showing a picture of Donald Trump, say with Robert Epstein, says nothing to me. If you got facts, bring them. Now, that might be an important picture if you're trying to say, well, they did know each other. They have met. I mean, here's a photograph. But we have factual evidence regarding somebody like Bill Gates. I mean, he made, 30 plus trips to Epstein Island? That's more than a photograph of the two of them together. That suggests a pretty strong relationship. And the fact that the information about those trips hasn't been released puts a lot of doubts in the minds of people that seems to me to be, justified. But guilt by association is a weak argument, and so is ad hominem arguments. Ad hominem, a Latin phrase meaning against the man. You attack the man. You don't like his argument. You can't fight the argument. You attack the man. We're losing, Kamala. We need to do something. Well, let's come up with a strategy. Let's come up with a pro-America, a real great, it's not working. Nobody believes us. Well, then let's call Trump Hitler. That's what they've done. So you see, this is the strategy. So this is the way this works. And you put the man in the blackest light possible, and you take something that he said and you put it in a narrative out of context. Some years ago, by way of example, Lifeline. Lifeline is in Birmingham, Alabama. They're an adoption agency, and they're an excellent adoption agency. They helped us with our adoption of our lovely daughter, Sasha. Some of you have seen Sasha. You can look back at a podcast that I did with Sasha. That's really fantastic when the film came out, Sound of Freedom, because Sasha knows a little bit from personal experience about child trafficking and what that looks like. And I'd gone to see the movie with her, and she had a strong reaction to it, and she had some things she wanted to say. So we did a podcast with her. But anyway, Lifeline helped us with our adoption of Sasha, and they were getting attacked wrongly. They were getting smeared wrongly by somebody who was very disgruntled. And so they were asked by local media who they could interview that might have a perspective on them. So they pointed them to me. They said, Larry, would you and your wife, Lori, do an interview with X news agency. I don't remember who it was, WBRC or NBC. I don't remember who it was. But we did an interview with them. And you could tell from the beginning of the interview, I don't know if Lori could, but I definitely could, just because this wasn't my first rodeo. I've done loads of television and radio interviews. And you can sense a bit of a setup. And it felt like there was an agenda here, that the woman that was interviewing us, that she didn't like Lifeline and she was going to smear them. And I was determined that she wouldn't smear them, meaning I was determined to tell her the truth about the very things that I felt like she was very misguided about. So they came to my office, set up all their cameras. She sits down in front of me. Lori and I sit on the couch, and she interviews us for more than an hour. And we had nothing but positive things to say about Herbie Newell, who is the director of Lifeline, and the good people over at Lifeline. If any of you are listening or watching, hello. Guess what she did? She took that interview and she took about, I don't know, a little sliver, a 10-second, 30-second sliver, maybe less than that, of something that I said completely out of context in order to use it to make it look like I was criticizing Lifeline. This is the way media works. Now, here shortly, some Italian journalists are going to show up here at the studio, not for not for an Ideas Have Consequences or WTF episode, but because they want to interview me for Italian public television. They interviewed me in 2020. And now they want to interview me again. They're delightful people. But when I did an interview with them in 2020, at that time, I didn't know them. I didn't know them at all. And I was pretty cagey about it. I'm very careful about these kinds of interviews these days. And I said, that's fine. I will agree to it, provided that you agree to allow one of my boys to come in and film the entire interview. And that is because if you take anything I say out of context and say that I said this, we will have evidence that it isn't what I said. Now, again, these are wonderful people. They're one of them, at least, I've come to know reasonably well and think very highly of for her integrity. But again, at the time, I didn't. And this is the way media works with a smear. They begin with their conclusion and they work back from it. They've already decided what they're going to do. And in this case, they've decided Trump is Hitler. So we don't want to interview any historian who will say, fascism, I mean, please, come on. Trump's not a fascist. He's not Hitler. Do you guys know anything about Hitler? Have you ever heard of him before this? Have you ever even watched a documentary about Hitler, possibly read a book? Did you take a class, a history class, where maybe Hitler was discussed honestly? Because the claim is idiotic. But they didn't do that. They instead looked for someone who would support their argument. And then, of course, it ends up, and see, there are probably more people who consult Wikipedia, hence the reason I cite Wikipedia, than who actually, say, watch PBS or NBC News or read the New York Times. I'm going to add this as a little asterisk, a little footnote to this episode. When I was, it was probably back when I was teaching as a graduate teaching assistant in university, and then later when I was teaching in a prep school, I was given, as part of a nonprofit institution, I was given a free subscription to the New York Times. So it would, regularly come. And I kind of like knowing, again, sort of what I was telling you about earlier. I was a news junkie. I want to know what the opposition is saying. But I got so frustrated with the New York Times dishonesty that I have tried multiple times to unsubscribe from the New York Times. And I still get it every morning. I still get it. I cannot tell you how hard it is to unsubscribe from the New York Times. It is so difficult. And I began thinking about that. This is just my theory. I don't know this for a fact, but I think they don't want you to unsubscribe. And I'm not still paying for it. Like they don't charge me for it. I've never paid for it. I think it's the way they keep their numbers up to advertisers to say we have X number of hundreds of thousands or millions of subscribers, whatever it is. I think it's a kind of dishonesty. If I don't let you unsubscribe, I can still say you're a subscriber. And who knows? I have to believe that they've done this with other people. But anyway, just an aside right there. Somebody go out there and subscribe to the New York Times to see if you can unsubscribe. I mean, it's like the Darien Gap. You just go in and you can never leave. You can never get out. Hotel California. It's kind of a weird sort of thing. So anyway, you have this smear campaign of Trump, and I've told you how they start it. They establish sources, and then they do this. They pretend they're just as shocked as everyone else by Trump's supposed Hitler bent. So then you have NBC News saying this headline: Harris says Trump is increasingly unhinged and blasts his reported praise of Hitler as dangerous. Now, the Hitler campaign, the Kamala Harris campaign, their allies launched this in the begin with. Therefore, they're not surprised by any of this. But see, then it gets established in media, and then kind of the last move is for her to come out and go, gosh, I see that in media they're saying that Trump is Hitler. He said all these things, and I just want to condemn all that. Well, her campaign was behind it in the first place. But by establishing sources, the Atlantic says this, the Washington Post says this, NPR says this, the New York Times says this, it then lends authority to her coming out and saying it. She didn't come out first. The campaign would never have allowed her to come out and claim that that Trump was Hitler first. They don't want her to do that. They want to let other people establish the beachhead for her to then come in and say, wow, gosh, all this talk, it appears that Donald Trump is a new Hitler. That's how it works. You see? So now, again, I said to you that I'm going to demonstrate why this is false. And this is demonstrated really quite easily. Again, bear in mind that Trump has been president of the United States before. We can look back at his track record. Now let's ask ourselves a few questions here. Did he establish a dictatorship in sometime between 2016 and 2020? He did not. Did he jail his political opponents? He did not. Did he weaponize government agencies against his political opponents? He did not. Did he take money from foreign governments? He did not. Did he spy on his opponent's presidential campaign using a government agency to do it? He did not. Did he pay a third party to create a false dossier claiming collusion with Russia? He did not. Did he use FEMA money to resettle potential non-citizens and potential supporters in the United States in order to benefit his own quest for power? He did not. Did he weaponize corporate America with DEI and ESG? He did not. Did he use mules to drop off duffel bags of illegal ballots in the middle of the night during a presidential election? He did not. Did he fight to keep illegal voters, or actual dead people, which I guess would still be illegal voters? It's illegal for you to vote when you're dead, people. Just remember that. When you're dead, you're not allowed to vote anymore. It's all over for you. But did he fight to keep illegal voters on the voter rolls? He did not. Did he collude with big tech? You remember the Twitter files that Musk revealed, which are astonishingly corrupt, or reveal rather astonishing corruption between big tech, collusion between big tech and government agencies? He did not. And these are all things, by the way, and they all are a kind of fascism, real fascism. These are all things that Democrats did, every single one. And by the way, Just for the sake of time, I couldn't list everything that they did. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Did he do any of these things? He didn't. They're all things that Democrats did. There's also a strong reaction, by the way. It's worth pointing out that there was a strong reaction, not just from the Trump campaign, but from many in the Jewish communities who were rightly offended by the comparison of Trump with Hitler. And the reason that they're offended is because it minimizes, it trivializes actually, the crimes of Hitler and the Nazis. I mean, Trump didn't put people on cattle cars and send them to concentration camps. Right now, we have political opponents who are in jail based on nothing because they are political opponents. I mean, essentially, the writ of habeas corpus has been suspended where they're concerned. Steve Bannon was jailed because he's a political opponent. I must say this, I texted Bannon the day that he got out. A quotation from Henry David Thoreau that says, the only place in a corrupt society for a just man is in jail. And he replied, wow, wow, wow. The only place for a just man in a corrupt society is in jail. These are all things that Democrats did. And by the way, they all reek of fascism. But the left, they don't believe that Donald Trump is Hitler. They don't think he's a wannabe dictator. They don't think he's a fascist. I mean, not the people who are, maybe people further down the lines who read this nonsense or listen to it, maybe they believe it because they're that ignorant and they don't know any better. Maybe some people on social media who are saying these things. But the people who are structuring these smear tactics, these campaigns, they don't believe that. They know better. They're panicked because they know what they stand to lose. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But you have this headline from the New York Post, written by a grandson of someone who suffered the Holocaust, people who died in the Holocaust. This headline, Hitler murdered my family. Comparing him to Trump is a despicable lie, and it absolutely is. So here you have someone who's Jewish responding and saying, how dare you trivialize the Holocaust, the crimes of Hitler and his Nazis, his minions, by comparing him to Trump, who you know he isn't. How dare you? The Jewish press published this headline. Kamala says Trump's like Hitler. Is he? And here's the opening of that article. It actually is well stated right here. Yesterday, Vice President Harris compared President Trump to Hitler, saying, Donald Trump is out for unchecked power. He wants a military like Adolf Hitler had, who will be loyal to him, not to our Constitution. He is unhinged, unstable. And given a second term, there would be no one to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses. Now, does Kamala Harris believe this? Maybe. She's an idiot. I mean, we do know this. She is not bright. I'm not saying it to be mean. I'm saying it because it's obvious. She is not intelligent. She was told to say this. If she was told to say he was wonderful, she'd say that too. I mean, she is an empty suit. She is a sock puppet. She does what she's told to do. Elon Musk has said this. I've said it for a very long time, that neither Biden nor she are in control of anything. You have a cabal who is behind the scenes. They're behind the curtain playing the role of the Wizards of Oz. And they say, you need to get out there and comparing to Hitler. Say this. I would be interested to see if you were to ask Kamala Harris any, just some basic Hitler trivia, would she know anything about Adolf Hitler? Where was Hitler from? When did he take power? What is the name of the infamous book that he wrote? I mean, I'd be curious to know if she could answer any of those questions. My guess is no, she couldn't. I don't think she knows anything about any of this stuff. She certainly couldn't give a definition, a working definition of what fascism is. And we're going to come back to Kelly's claim of what it is. It has been interesting to note how the definition of fascism keeps changing. And it keeps changing to look more and more like somebody who wears, a MAGA hat. It's kind of like, the ETA, the estimated time of arrival on your GPS. It's always going to be right because it keeps changing. It calculates in every stop, or if you speed up or if you slow down, it's going to be right when it gets there. And that's what they're doing with the definition of fascism. They keep tinkering with what it actually is. To finish this article, we'll come back to the definition in just a moment, but to finish just another line from this article in the Jewish press, the author goes on to say, the VP's comments comparing Trump to Hitler indicates she doesn't care about minimizing the horrors of the Holocaust, or she is an imbecile incapable of understanding. I dare say she's both. She is both. So the question becomes then, why do they do it? I mean, if so many people look at this and go, well, this is absurd. I mean, members of the Posse would know better than to believe this. They would hear this and go, I mean, this is dumb. This is dumb to make this claim. So why do they do it? Well, there was a time when you couldn't have done it. And I would say that time is not too far gone. I would say 20 years ago, certainly any time before that, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to make that kind of comparison without it possibly sinking your campaign. And that is because there would be far too many members of that generation who know better who would still be alive. There would be a lot of soldiers who liberated those camps, people who fought against actual fascists, Nazis, people who maybe met Hitler, knew Hitler, and certainly loads of Holocaust survivors who would be up in arms at these kinds of claims. But unfortunately, now that we're 79 years past the end of World War II, most of those people are dead. And as I said, one of these articles here, the one that was written in the New York Post, that's not written by a Holocaust survivor or a Holocaust survivor's child. It's written by a grandson of a Holocaust survivor. Now, by the way, I don't think that undermines his authority on the subject. This is someone who would have heard those stories at the knee of a survivor. That to me is a very good source. And we've had millions of other survivors and loads of them in interviews and elsewhere. And we've seen the camps and been to them and all that kind of thing. So again, it's been well covered. This ground has been well trod. But the point is, you would have had a much more visceral reaction to the Harris campaign's claim, or they're going along with the narrative that Hitler is Trump. But still, the question remains, why do they do it? Well, they do it for this reason. Let's put the image of Donald Trump on the screen right here, post-assassination attempt. There he is, fist pumping, saying fight, 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 as the Secret Service is taking him away, much to the chagrin of the left. This just invigorated Trump, by the way. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, in an interview after this, said, Zuckerberg, this is the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life. His reaction to this. And then the American flag is behind him. I mean, it's iconic. Time magazine put this initially on their cover, and then they changed it, cutting out the flag. And it was because they took a lot of criticism from Democrats who said, we can't have that out there. We don't want that out there. But the point is, the Trump is Hitler narrative part of what the left wants to do in this, and I know there's many who believe that they orchestrated the assassination attempt. I'll wait for that evidence. But what we do have evidence of is that they created an atmosphere of assassination. When you are calling a man Hitler, you are creating a kind of moral imperative that he be assassinated. And loads of Democrats were saying that very thing all over the news. Somebody needs to stop that man. We need to put a bullet in that man. We need to put a bullseye on that man, as Biden himself said. And they wanted to have the ability to deny it. Well, that's not what I meant by bullseye. That is, I didn't mean actually shoot him. I just meant, when I said stop him, I didn't mean shoot him. I didn't mean assassinate him. They wanted deniability, but their rhetoric was a rhetoric of violence. And it was calculated and it was deliberate, and they wanted to provoke what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. That was the goal. Except that it failed. Instead, Trump survived and he came out, more popular than ever. But that was one of the reasons they did it, because in comparing him to Hitler, you are creating not just the environment of assassination, but a moral imperative to assassinate him. You're saying to any potential assassin, to any would-be assassin, you'll be a hero if you kill him. You'll be another Dietrich Bonhoeffer. That you plotted against this man and you stood up bravely for all of us, for freedom, for truth. This is what they were trying to do. So that's one of the reasons they did it. The second reason they did it is they wanted to force the Trump campaign to deny the claim. It's like that old trick question. When did you stop beating your wife? There's no answer to that question that isn't going to make you look kind of bad. You're put immediately on your heels on the defensive to deny an outrageous claim that is undoubtedly false. But they get the soundbite of you saying, I didn't beat my wife. And because they get that soundbite, they can now plaster it everywhere, and they can put headlines out there that says, so-and-so denies beating his wife, which plants the seed in everyone's mind. Well, why is he saying that? Maybe he beats his wife. That's the goal. So they wanted to force the Trump campaign to deny it. And unfortunately, the Trump campaign fell for this. They played right into their hands, so that you have these headlines all over the place of Trump denying it. You have this from USA Today. Melania Trump defends her husband, Donald Trump. He's not Hitler. They loved publishing that headline. I can tell you. They were having spasms of joy putting that headline together. I didn't beat my wife. I'm not a Nazi. Then you have this from the Huffington Post. Trump insists I'm not Hitler, but social media has other thoughts. This is another tactic, by the way. I can go on social media and find anybody saying anything I want, screenshot it and say social media, as if social media is an authority. I mean, you name the figure. I can find somebody on social media who hates them. You could probably, I'm not going to do it right here, but you could probably find somebody who says that Taylor Swift is a fascist and say social media says Taylor Swift is a fascist. You see how this works. But see, they wanted to force Trump to deny the claim so that they get these kinds of headlines, these kinds of sound bites. And then it allowed Jimmy Kimmel, who is dishonest as it gets. I mean, talk about a sock puppet for the left. Jimmy Kimmel has advice for Donald Trump. If you have to tell people I'm not Hitler, something is wrong. That was the goal, to create the atmosphere of assassination, a moral imperative of assassination, and failing that, to force the Trump campaign to deny that you're Hitler. Once you start doing that, you're reacting to them. See, this is like chess. If you've ever played chess, one of the things you want to make your opponent do is react to you. It's very difficult to mount a strategy if you're always reacting to your opponent. He puts you in check and you waste a move, moving your king out of check or another piece to block or take that piece which has put your king in check. And somebody who's constantly doing that, even if they don't have a strategy of their own, but they're constantly forcing you to react to them, it's effective because you can never mount an offensive when you're always on the defensive. Now, some would say, well, they forced a podcast like this. One could say that they have forced a podcast like this, but I think we're taking the offensive in this podcast. I'm not just going through this podcast telling you, well, Trump isn't Hitler. I'm telling you who is like Adolf Hitler, who is like the actual fascists. We're taking the offensive on this podcast. But you see, the Trump campaign fell for this. In coming out, they should have ignored it. This is too stupid to respond to. Well, I'm not going to respond to that claim. I'm not going to respond to any questions along that. I'm not going to give you the soundbite where I would say, I'm not Hitler. But they did. They did fall for that. But one of the things that I want you to understand about this isn't new. I want to remind you that this actually has been going on for quite a while. Now, I got a call from a Houston radio station, a radio show there, a very good show called Jimmy Barrett. Jimmy Barrett Live, I think, is the name of the show there in Houston. And I was in Panama. And I get a call from them asking if I will come on and respond to claims from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, that Trump is Hitler. Now, again, this is July of 2019. Now, I want you to listen. We're going to play the whole interview here because it's relevant. Even now, 5 years later, it's relevant to what we're talking about, but it will also remind you of the rhetoric that they were using in 2019. Now, let's play it.
More Jimmy Barrett now on KPRC 950. Real Texas. Real talk.
Hello, Paraguay calling 332. I know our number looks weird. We call guests and I always try to warn them it's going to be a weird-looking 5-digit phone number. That'll be us, 332, here on AM 950 KPRC. Glad you could join us here today. The comparisons that mainstream commentators seem to want to do of our current administration and Adolf Hitler, or our border patrol system and concentration camps. The amount of Nazi references is staggering. It's staggering. And when they get called out on it, they generally double down. I know AOC was doubling down today. She refuses to back off on her comparison of what's going on at the border with concentration camps. Joining us to talk about all this, conservative cultural commentator and columnist Larry Taunton. Larry, welcome to AM 950 KPRC.
Hey, it's delighted to be with you. And let me begin by saying that your producer speaks excellent English, given that he's from South America.
Did it really come up as Paraguay?
It did.
Wow.
I thought, I can't answer this. I'm expecting a call from Houston.
I have no idea how that happens. We hear that all the time. It just comes up as some weird number. But there's nothing stranger than listening to somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez make a comparison to what we're doing at the border, housing these migrants with a concentration camp, then having the director of Auschwitz or basically offer, well, we'll be glad to show you exactly what a concentration camp looks like and is. And, of course, she's not interested in that and keeps doubling down on the remark.
Yeah, she's an idiot. Listen, I have been to Dachau, to Auschwitz. In fact, I was at Dachau just a couple of months ago. I've been there several times. Auschwitz, Mauthausen, Buchenwald, Mittelbau-Dora, several of the concentration camps. It was my good fortune many years ago to receive a fellowship that sent me abroad to study the intellectual origins of the Holocaust, and I've led tour groups there, and it's monumental historical ignorance to draw those kinds of comparisons. I mean, the concentration camps existed for a singular purpose, and that was to annihilate its occupants. And that's not what's happening on the border. We're talking about people who are coming across the border illegally. They know they're coming across illegally. The United States government is rushing to just put them somewhere, having inadequate border patrol, and of course, as we all know, no wall. And so I'm sure that they're not staying in the Ritz-Carlton. But this is these are not concentration camps.
No, they're not. They're not even close to being concentration camps. And, of course, she's making other accusations as well, but I'll leave that for another time. I don't know when we started to cross the line on mainstream media. Maybe, I don't know if Don Lemon was the first person to do it on CNN. Undoubtedly, he probably wasn't. But plenty of the commentators, or news anchors, if you will, who are really glorified commentators, started making the comparisons quite a while ago, comparing President Trump to Adolf Hitler. Is there anybody other than Adolf Hitler in the confines of history that can be compared to Adolf Hitler?
Well, Joseph Stalin, Mao, certainly, and Idi Amin. There are Franco, all different in terms of the scale of the terror that they enacted. In many ways, Stalin made Hitler look like a schoolboy, and he killed many times more number of people in his own country. But no one in American history, and we may be thankful for that. I mean, the rule of law remains intact in this country, and I know people complain and feel very much that perhaps it isn't, but when it's truly absent, you will know it. I just completed an around the world, literally going around the world in 80 days journey, just to see what the rest of the world looks like. I mean, the left is constantly telling us that the United States needs to get with it. And what you discover is that I don't care where I was, if I was in Europe or if I was in Africa, Asia, South America, it didn't matter. People wanted to come to America. And most of the world does live under some form of totalitarianism, an absence of the kind of freedoms that we enjoy. And Donald Trump is no Adolf Hitler.
No, he's not. You can argue about whether you like his style. You could even argue, if you want to try to make an argument about whether or not you think he's getting the desired results. Although, looking at what's going on with the economy, it's pretty tough to not sell me on the idea that things are pretty good in this country right now. In fact, things are rather at a high end historically, or a low end, depending on what you're talking about.
For sure.
Unemployment is historically low. We are growing the economy again. Other than this last month, the jobs report numbers have been good. We have an unemployment rate of about under 3.8% and falling. And it's tough to find fault with what's going on with our economy right now.
No, you certainly can't. And let me say this, to give people a glimpse of what totalitarianism looks like. Under totalitarianism, if we had truly a Hitler-esque a figure in office who had that kind of power, he'd throw a couple of 100,000 workers at the building of a border wall and work them to death. And when they'd move their bodies aside and throw a couple 100,000 more at it until the project was done. I mean, this is the way real dictators do it. And the United States has never had anything quite like that. We have freedom of the press, we have freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of petition. All of those things remain intact. And so the kind of comparisons that the left wants to make with Trump, and we should really begin to ask the question, why are they making these kind of comparisons? And it's because he stands in the way of the progressive agenda.
Well, and would it be fair, Larry Taunton, to say that the progressive agenda appears more like a totalitarian state than what we're seeing out this current administration. I mean, the lack of freedom of speech, trying to shout down ideas or trying to shut down conservatives or even moderates to a certain extent. Anybody who's not down with every aspect of that agenda, it's not enough to disagree. You have to shout them down and shut them up.
Well, let's just take another example. You were saying is Don Lemon the first? Well, actually, if we go back, I don't recall how many years it's been now, but I want to say about maybe 2009, 10, somewhere in there. Hank Williams Jr. Are you ready for some football? He compared Obama to Adolf Hitler. He lost his job immediately, and that was treated as an absurd thing to say, and of course it was an absurd sort of thing to say. But now we have the left doing this with great regularity. They do not want to enforce our own laws on immigration. It seems to me that since time immemorial, countries protected their borders and they protected their citizens. And this is not what's happening. And we're increasingly seeing a push to overthrow the Electoral College, and that would move us towards what the Federalist Papers warned, James Madison and the Federalist Papers warned would become a tyranny of the majority. So in answer to your question, is the left moving towards a kind of tyranny? It seems to me that they are moving towards a sort of mob rule.
Well, speaking of mob rule, Larry, I'm sure you've heard about what's been going on in Portland with Antifa. And their very liberal mayor basically is accused of telling the police department to stand down and let Antifa do its thing. And that includes going after conservatives and beating them up. Well,
but yet you will not hear any comparisons with Hitler's brown shirts. Who did, of course, those kinds of things. But yes, this is the kind of thing that we are seeing happening with a great deal of regularity these days in our country, where there are these sort of organized protests.
We hear accusations all the time, Larry Taunton, about our public school system. And certainly this is not true of all schools in all states. But either the way they are sort of revising history, if you will, the history they are teaching, or just plain not really teaching the things that they don't seem to have young people want to know about the history of this country and the history of the world, and to kind of maybe dumb us down just a little bit. It's hard to make an argument about some of the things that are being said when you don't really know what's happened in the past.
Well, for sure. I mean, it was philosopher George Santayana who said that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeating it. And is history being revised in a big way? Certainly, that's happening a lot. And what's happening in our public schools? Listen, there are a lot of fine public school teachers who are overwhelmed with the job that is before them. That's become extremely litigious. It's become very difficult just to teach. Teaching is just a very small part of what is expected of teachers these days, and so they certainly have my sympathy. But curriculums seem to me to be rather underwhelming.
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably right about that. Hey, good to talk to you, sir. Thank you. Let's do this again sometime.
Hey, delighted to be with you.
Take care.
Take
Conservative
care.
cultural commentator, columnist Larry Taunton joining us here on AM 950 KPRC. Back with more in a moment. Jimmy Baird Show on a Monday.
So there you have it. Does that sound familiar? And listening to it again before, I decided to use it in this podcast, I remembered having done, I think I did more than one interview actually on that topic, but this one I thought was a little better quality audio and some good questions that he asked. I was reminded of, I mentioned it in the interview, Hank Williams Jr. Remember Hank Williams Jr.? He used to do the opening, not Carrie Underwood, not Faith Hill. He did. Hank Williams Jr. did the Monday Night Football opening. Are you ready for some football? A Monday night party. He'd be riding around in in an old classic convertible, singing that song. And then He one day said that he felt that Obama was like Hitler. And guess what? There was a furor over that. I mean, how dare him say this? He was dragged through the mud by everybody. Even in the Country Music Awards, there was this very funny exchange between him and Brad Paisley, where Brad Paisley said, you can't compare the President of the United States to Hitler. You can't do that, Hank. Hank Williams Jr. was fired from Monday Night Football. He was canceled from making the very comparison that the left now makes casually. This is how hypocritical these people are. And by the way, I'm not going to say that there won't be a time that it's appropriate to compare someone to Adolf Hitler or to call someone a fascist. But if you're going to do it, you need to bring the receipts. And I'm kind of sorry that I even use that phrase, because I've been saying there are two phrases we need to drop from social media, from the English language, and one of them is bring the receipts, and the other one is bingo card. I'm sick of hearing both of them. But anyway, all of that aside, you need to bring evidence if you're going to say that. And I've brought evidence right here on this show why the left, they're not as much Marxist as they are fascist. They're what I call fascio-Marxists. They are using both Marxist and fascist tactics, but their end goal, the WEF's, the World Economic Forum's end goal, globalist end goal of which Democrats are a part, they're largely fascist with some Marxist elements. And if you're curious what I mean by that, you can go and watch. I've done more than a couple of episodes on the World Economic Forum and where I explain what I'm talking about there. Question becomes, will Harris's strategy here work? Will she complete the Hail Mary? My answer is no. I don't think so. In Downton Abbey, Lori and I have started watching Downton Abbey. I tend to be kind of behind, what's popular. I didn't watch Downton Abbey, wasn't interested in Downton Abbey when it was on TV. And somebody told me I should give it a try. And so I did. And so Lori and I have been watching it. And Maggie Smith's character, Lawrence Fox, he knew her. She just recently passed away. She plays the Dowager in this, and he's thought she's a great actress. So I've been paying very close attention to her in Downton Abbey. But she had this wonderful line last night where she chastises, one of her grandchildren. And she says this, she says, vulgarity is no substitute for wit. Vulgarity is no substitute for wit. And here, when we're talking about the Harris campaign, I would say this. I would say that ad hominem attacks, comparing your opponent to Hitler, is no substitute for an actual strategy. You see, the Harris campaign has no strategy. They have no positive campaign. It's all based on running off of negativity. Well, he's Hitler. They're hoping that's going to get them across the line. Now, I tell you that I don't think it will work, and I don't think it is working because Trump is soaring in the polls. The McDonald's and garbage truck trolls of the Harris campaign were genius. They were genius. They just leaned right into it and said, okay, we'll run with that. We're going to run with that. And I think that they're performing beautifully, and hence the reason they're surging in the polls, and hence the reason I think if tomorrow, this is what I think is going to happen, I'm telling you what I think would happen if this were a fair election. If this were a one-day, in-person, U.S. citizens only with proof of ID required for voting election, this would almost be a Reagan-Mondale wipeout, landslide. Not quite 84, but I think Trump would win in a landslide. Unfortunately, that isn't what it is, and we do know that Democrats love to cheat. There will be a lot of shenanigans, and for that reason, I am concerned that this won't be election day, it will be election week and possibly election month. And that's because they're the real fascists. They're the real fascists. They have colluded with big tech. ESG, by the way, in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and ESG, economic, social, and governance, those are fascism. Fascism, strictly speaking, is a strict regimentation of the economy for war, with a strong element of nationalism. Now, we will say that the left, they're not nationalists. They don't love America. They hate America. But fascism is a strict regimentation of the economy, the weaponizing of the economy for war. And you say, for war where? Ukraine? No. In this case, it's against domestic populations. You see all those nifty robot dogs and warrior robots they're creating and drones and all that stuff. They're primarily preparing that stuff to use on you. It's for use against domestic populations. You see, Marxists don't believe in private property. Fascists believe in private property. They just believe the government controls it and directs its use. And that's what they're doing with DEI and ESG. They're weaponizing corporate America and government agencies against American citizens. That is fascism. That is classic fascism. That's what they're about. Suppression of political opponents, that's what they're doing. That's fascism. Strict control of media that only puts out your messaging, that's fascism, and that's what the left is doing. Donald Trump's not doing that. Imprisoning your political opponents, attempting to assassinate or at least create the atmospheres for assassination of your political opponents, that's fascism, also Marxism right there. That's not Donald Trump doing that. They're the real fascists. I'll also throw this in. We shouldn't leave Tim Walz out of the equation. I remind you of something I said about him earlier. This is from ABC News. This is a headline from ABC News, a story from ABC News that I'm reading from here. Walz married his wife Gwen, a fellow teacher, on June 4, 1994, the 5th anniversary of China's brutal suppression of Tiananmen Square protests. Quote, this is her speaking, he wanted to have a date. Now, she'd be saying it with really wild, wide eyes, and she'd be screaming it. He wanted to have a date he'll always remember, she told the Star Herald before they wed. Who are the real fascists? China, by the way, isn't communist. I've been there, not communist. One of the things that struck me when I was there is that the only people who believe Marxism can really work, they're people who live in London and Paris and DC and Southern California, Portland, Seattle. Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, Vietnam, they don't believe that that Marxist economics can work. They've abandoned them. They don't believe in Beijing that they can work. They've abandoned them. They don't believe in Moscow they can work anymore. They have abandoned them. All of those countries, formerly communist countries, are now fascist, meaning that they realized that they were getting destroyed, left behind by the West monetarily, and their own economies were imploding. And therefore, they had to do what the Chinese said, adopt economic policies with Western characteristics. Meaning, what we're going to do is we're going to link an oligarchy, a totalitarian regime, we're going to try to couple it with capitalism, because we need hard currency to stay in power. We need a military if we're to keep up. So that's what they did. So when you show up in, say, Beijing or Shanghai or Ho Chi Minh City or Moscow, one of the things you'll see that you didn't see when they were strictly communist is you will see Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Mercedes. You will see all of the big brands. You will see billboards advertising them. You did not see that when they were strictly Marxist, when they were communist. They rejected anything Western. They rejected capitalism as a whole. Everything had to be made in a communist country, specifically from their own, which meant that almost everything was crap. But they realized that everybody wanted these other products, and they were getting obliterated economically. And the point simply being, the reason I say that is because Tim Walz, he's a fascist, burned his own capital to the ground deliberately. He made more than 30 trips. This is before 2016, by the way. So who knows how many he's actually had. Some of it while he was a member of the National Guard, 30 plus trips to China. Now, why would you do that? As the Posse will know, I went one time and I was banned from coming again. Sort of. They told me I could come back. They would grant a visa if I signed a document stating I would neither say nor write anything negative about China. Point is, you have to sell your soul if you want to go back and forth to China all the time. They only let you keep coming if they see that there's something that benefits them in doing it. I had Kay Rubisek on this show, who has done a documentary about the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party. And that's the way they operate. Now, how is it that they allow Tim Walz to come and go more than 30 times? And how is it that a guy, I mean, can you imagine your wife saying, well, my husband, he chose September 11th as the day of our wedding. So romantic, because he wanted a day that he could remember. Who does that? Who chooses the anniversary of Bloody Sunday or Kristallnacht or the invasion of Poland deliberately as the day of a celebration, unless you're somebody who celebrates those awful tragedies? And that's who Tim Walz is. He is a fascist. It's why Kamala Harris chose him. This isn't by mistake, ladies and gentlemen. They're accusing Donald Trump of being the very thing that they are. He's the one that'll create a dictatorship as they're constructing a dictatorship. Pay attention. Now, I want to close with a few books that will help you as you process some of these things. The first one I have here on the desk is William L. Shire's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It is superb. It is a classic. It is one that even now it is one of the seminal works in the field. And if you subscribe to some sort of audio book, program, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by Shire is available in audiobook, and it's read by one of my favorite narrators, Grover Gardner. It is superb. I read this probably back in the 80s, and I've since listened to it no less than twice and maybe 3 times. It is just simply that good. And for me, I like to have the physical book when I'm also listening to the audiobook, because I'll hear something and I think, I want to go and check that. I want to go and look at that. I want to read that. I want to underline that. I want to mark that. But this book is superb, and it will give you insights into these kind of stupid claims, because you might be listening, and I want to be sensitive to this. If you're somebody out there who genuinely doesn't understand the nature of World War II, who Adolf Hitler was, who the fascists were, I'm sympathetic, provided you're not going out there making wild pronouncements and claims. In some cases, public schools have failed you. So I get it. You might not have been properly educated on these things, but there's things you can do about it. Don't remain in your ignorance. This is an excellent book and an excellent place to start. And I've deliberately chose one that's not just a heavy academic treatise. It's one you can listen to that's both factual, accurate, but it's also compelling. It's quite a compelling read or listening to it. And Shire was a journalist back when that actually meant something. And he was a journalist of some integrity, but he was in Germany, he was in France, he was in Europe during these years of Hitler's rise. And he was there from, I think the early 30s right through to 1940. And so he knew a number of the principles. He was there, and his account of what was taking place in Germany, in Europe at that time, is superb, and it remains one of the standards in the field. Another one here is by Alan Bullock. Alan Bullock, one of the premier historians and biographers. He has written a separate biography of Adolf Hitler. And this is kind of his joint biography, Hitler and Stalin. But you can get, I don't know if he's available on audiobook or not, but he's excellent. He's superb, and he's one of the authorities. Don't go and listen to that idiot, Cooper, or whatever that guy's name is, who Tucker Carlson had. And he's excellent. And then I have here another one. This is by Joachim Fest, and this is his biography, also superb. His biography of Hitler. These are biographies that are historical accounts that are quite credible, authoritative, and are based on factual evidence. They're not just making wild claims. So they're quite superb. And to these, I would add Christabel Bielenberg's "The Past is Myself." I think we'll put that image on the screen here for you. "The Past is Myself," and I've forgotten the name of the sequel. It's a two-parter, but anyway, start with this one and you'll know what the second one is. She was an English woman who in the 1930s married a German lawyer, and she went to live in Germany. And so she's not a politician. She was not a professional writer. She was a homemaker. She was a wife and mother, but she's very intelligent and she's very thoughtful. And it is, so if these are, accounts by professional historians, this is an account by a very intelligent observer, a woman, an English woman who brought her English sensibilities to Germany. Her husband was an honorable man. And I believe her husband, I think I'm right in saying this, it's been some years since I've read it, was implicated in the plot to assassinate Hitler. But it gives you her account of the slow changes taking place in in Germany at that time, the rise of Hitler, and her own observations of what was taking place in the culture, what that looked like. And her stories are quite compelling. And just to give one of them to you, one of her stories is she talks about the physician, the pediatrician who took care of her children. Came to her house and stayed up with one of her children all night long, stayed all night in the house to see this child through a high fever. And this physician told her that he could no longer be her doctor. And I was like, why? And she says, well, I'm Jewish and I'm being forced to hand over my practice to an Aryan, to somebody who's not Jewish. And then, of course, he eventually had to flee. But this for her was she was kind of insulated from some of the things that were going on because she wasn't Jewish. But little by little, she becomes aware of what's taking place in Germany. It's a very compelling memoir. I would strongly encourage you to read it. And then the last one I would encourage you to read is Mein Kampf. Now, I remember when Donald Trump was running for president in, I believe it was 2016, they dug up an old story, the media did, where Ivanka, was that her name? It's gone out of Ivana. Anyway, it's gone out of my name. His wife, the mother of his children, her name, she died, and it's gone straight out of my head. I apologize. Anyway, you'll know who I'm talking about. She had claimed, when they were getting a divorce, by the way, which I think is significant, she had claimed that he kept a copy of Mein Kampf beside the bed. Now, the left jumped all over this. I don't have a problem with you having a copy of Mein Kampf beside the bed. I want you to read it. You need to read evil books. In fact, this is something I think I'm going to do for members of the Posse only. You have to subscribe to this channel, but evil books that you should read. You should read some evil books. You need to read good ones. You need to have an education and a context for understanding evil books so they don't warp your mind. But you need to read books like Mein Kampf. You need to read the Quran, for example. You need to know what they say. I wish more people had read Mein Kampf when it was published in 1925 and prior to the outbreak of war in September of 1939. If they had, they would have known what was coming. Hitler laid it out. He said what he was planning to do in the East. He gave an unvarnished opinion of what he thought of Slavs and of Jews. It was all right there. Now, I will say it's a difficult read, and that's not because Hitler's vocabulary is so huge or he's so intelligent. It's because it's a screed. It's a rant. And that's, by the way, is the way the Quran reads it. The Quran was put together by illiterates, so it's almost impossible to read. It's almost unintelligible, but you need to know that. And the only way you'll know that is by actually engaging it. But go and look at Mein Kampf, and then ask yourself, does this sound like something that was written by, say, Donald Trump? I think you'll come to the conclusion that the answer to that is no. Now, the election is tomorrow. Expect anything. You should expect anything. I want to emphasize that. And that is because Democrats have too much to lose for them to go quietly. They have endless war and money laundering in Ukraine to lose. That matters to a lot of people who are being enriched by that war. They have insider trading. There is a fun Twitter account that's called something like Nancy Pelosi's Stock Tracker. And you can follow it because she has to make her her stock trades, her investments, she has to make them public. And if you follow her, if you follow this account, which is following her investments, your portfolio will be up by 200% this year. She's just lucky, I guess. Guess she's just lucky. There is illegal insider trading that is taking place. They stand to lose that. They're open border and illegal voting schemes. They stand to lose that tomorrow. The advancement of the globalists, that is to say the World Economic Forum agenda, they stand to lose that. And a lot of them face the possibility of going to jail. Milley said, as if to try to get our sympathy, that he fears that if Trump takes office, he'll be court-martialed and jailed. You should be. You are guilty of treason. You are guilty of treason. I feel no pity for you in that regard. Worse, you're unrepentant for your treason. But the point I want to make here is that we're talking about individuals who are desperate, and hence the Hail Mary, the effort to try to win the game at the very end via devious, dubious means, is because they are utterly panicked. I have said before that this is like the Allies moving in on Berlin at the end of the war, so that you have Nazi soldiers who are burning their uniforms and putting on civilian clothes and trying to blend in with everyone else to try to escape. You have the burning of documents to hide their crimes. That is what's happening. And that's the reason why I think tomorrow will not be election day. It will be the beginning of election week and possibly election month. And I hope I'm wrong. Feel free to dump on me if I am wrong. I'm not saying that I know for sure that's going to happen. I mean, if we are not vigilant, if you're not looking out for irregularities, if there is not some kind of policing of this, Democrats are going to do everything they can to steal the election because they have so much to lose. So please make sure you vote. And I want to throw this in at the end. I'm hearing a lot of ads, public service announcements about the importance of voting. I don't believe that everyone should vote. I don't believe that everyone who is eligible to vote should vote. I'm not of that view. I would prefer a lot less people voted, actually. I would prefer that only the people who understand the issues vote. If you have no idea what's going on, please don't vote, unless it's for Donald Trump. You ever go in and you're seeing, when you get down to some of the the local issues. Occasionally you come across an issue you don't know anything about because it's so very, specific, and it involves a district or a school or, something that really doesn't have anything to do with you. I don't vote on a few of those because they're things that I'm going, I don't really know what's going on here. I don't know what this is about. I don't know what this is specifically referring to, and it doesn't really affect me. But make sure that you are informed about what's taking place and that you are ready tomorrow to cast your vote. And by the way, the local elections matter. The state elections matter. It's not just the presidential election. Well, let me close with this. Trump was accused, falsely, I believe, of claiming that Hitler did some good things. Well, I will tell you that Hitler did do a couple of good things. The first is he killed a lot of his own Nazi soldiers. I mean, a bunch of them. He executed wholesale towards the end of the war. That was pretty good. And Hitler shot himself. I think that was pretty good. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton.